Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I am so excited about my guest this week, and I want to start by saying it is her son, her deceased son's birthday today, even though it won't air today. I want to say happy birthday to Joe, who is in
Thank you.
heaven, and it's
Thank
August
you.
31st. Yes.
Hmm?
So I have with me today Elaine Suarez, and she lives in Bakersfield, California. And she is a very happily married woman who she's been with her husband Isidore for 38 years. And she was in the insurance company for many, many years and retired on your son's birthday, right? In 2018.
Yes, actually, it was August 31st. Yes.
Yes, on your son's birthday, and you have two daughters who are still with you today
Hmm.
with grandchildren and all of the things. So I want to welcome you, and I want to
Thank
set the
you.
stage because I do know a little bit about your story that you
Hmm.
lost your son, Joseph Anthony Suarez, on May 28th, 2018. He was 27 years old, and he was your first-born child and
That's
the
correct.
eldest. And
Yes.
he died of fentanyl poisoning. And you also noted that he had an undiagnosed heart disease, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, also known as HCM. So I wanted to just set that stage before we begin our
Okay.
conversation.
Thank you. That's correct.
Why don't you open up? Because I know I can feel it. You are bursting to tell us
I
about who
know.
Joe was as a human being. And I just want to note, too, everyone knows that I have started incorporating my oracle cards to set the tone for us today. So I've got two cards that I pulled to set the tone for our interview today. One is blessed, one of my favorite cards. It is so beautiful. And the other one is higher power. And what I intuited when I pulled these cards is just your energy around who you are and how your son's death has moved you into a much deeper place around being in touch with your spirituality and your actual
Hmm.
connection to your son on the other
Hmm.
side. So those were the perfect cards to pull this morning. And I'm sure that more will be revealed as we have our conversation. So tell us about Joe, your son, on his birthday,
Oh
please.
gosh, yeah. I was telling my one of my girls and talking to my sister, and I said, "How am I going to talk about Joe like in an hour or less than an hour? I mean, how do you do that?" Because everything about him was so big, just big. His spirit was big, and it all. I was writing this morning. I was doing a post on my page, and I remember Joe just like when he was born. Like he was born and his eyes were just wide open, and there was like 100 people in the waiting room because back then I didn't want to know what the gender was, and I remember like all these people coming in after he was born, and I'm like thinking, what are you guys doing? And his eyes were so big, it was like he was just anxiously waiting for to come into this world, and so that was the beginning of his brightness in this world, and it continued for 27 years. He grew up, we were very close family. We didn't have children for 5 years before when we got married because I was too afraid. But then we had Joe, and it was just like he was so much fun that we had another 3 years later. We had Allie, and then 4 years after that, we had Juliana. And so we were good. We were good. And growing up, he just was, teachers loved him, coaches loved him. His circle of friends were always a large circle of friends. And he made us laugh. He made everybody laugh from the time he was a little baby. Growing up, he made us laugh even more. Going into high school, it was, you know, I was nervous. I was scared because high school, but he was so like welcoming to people. People just gravitated to him. And I know that happens a lot with adult children. We say that, but really, the comments that people sent me after he had passed was, Joe always made everybody feel good. He was very inclusive, and so he could walk into a party and know like nobody, but by the time he would leave, he was everybody's best friend, And so that's, he was good at baseball. He played baseball his whole life up through high school. Very proud of the school he went to, Bakersfield High School. He was a driller. He played baseball. He was so prideful. And he just, his spirit was so big and people just loved him. And I saw that at his service, at his memorial service, because I remember sitting there. I don't remember a lot, but I remember I could hear people in the background. I could hear people crying. I could just hear the noise. And I just remember I had to turn around. And I remember I turned around and it was like this sea of people from all walks of life. There was not enough seating in the church for everybody. People were standing outside. I mean, it was just remarkable. Like, I knew he knew people, but to the length of what I saw was beyond anything I ever imagined. So he loved life. He embraced life. He was when you would talk to him, it was like you could be in a crowded room and it was like you were the only person talking to him. He made you feel that way. He made you feel like he never disregarded anything anybody said. If somebody interrupted him, he'd say, "Hey man, hold on, just a second. She's talking to me right now." He was a best friend to everybody. And one of the things I always say about him, he never left a friend behind. He just didn't. If somebody was down and out, or if one of his friends was having a difficult time, it didn't matter what time of day, it didn't matter what he was doing, he would stop what he was doing because he never wanted anybody to feel alone. He was best friends to his two sisters. I mean, we say "I love you" all the time, but the "I love you" with them was like, "I love you." And it was when he left in the morning or left to school, or if they went to school or went to work, anytime they departed, it was always "I love you." My daughter once told me a story that she was working at this store in the mall, and Joe came in to visit her, and before he left, he hugged her and said, "I love you." She goes, "I love you too." And one of her friends was like, is that your boyfriend? She goes, "That's my brother." And
it's funny because that's how me and my siblings are too. And it's very much, yeah. And it took me a long time to understand that not all siblings feel that way. I would do anything for my brothers, and they would do anything at all for me.
And that was him with the girls, and it's, it's still, I mean, it was so sudden.
So tell us, can you tell us what happened? Because and we'll have links. I mean, you've written a beautiful story about your son. I saw all of the pictures of him. I mean, physically, he's just beautiful, and he has this amazing smile. So you could feel his energy coming off those photos. Like he looked like he just had the twinkle in his eyes. I mean, I could see it, I could feel it. And obviously he got that from you, because I mean, you just burst with this beautiful energy.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'd like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this ad. Hey guys, I want to take a minute to offer an opportunity for those of you who've been searching for a mental health therapist and haven't had any luck getting callbacks. I know it's challenging to find help, so I've partnered with BetterHelp. They are the world's largest therapy service, and they are 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you'd expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility at a more affordable price. Get 10% off right now on your first month at betterhelp.com/rockyourshine. That's betterhelp.com/rockyourshine.
Now, back to our episode.
Before we move into your grief journey,
Mhm.
which I know was quite dark, and where you are now, which is also remarkable, I'm sure that must seem that way to you, like unrecognizable, right? Where you were and where you
Yeah.
are. Tell us
Yeah.
what happened. Tell us what.
Okay.
Yeah.
What occurred that, in fact, that my mother-in-law was just asking me yesterday. I spent time with her yesterday, and we were just talking about this. You know, Joe was always in and out. I mean, he had moved out of our house and moved back and moved out and moved back. And the last time he moved back home, he's like, I'm staying here and you ain't getting rid of me. I'm like, Joe, you're going to have girlfriends and they're going to come over. And he's like, I don't say I live with my parents. So what? You know? So what had happened was it was Memorial Day and he had spent the night at a friend's. He called me that morning. He had called me that night before. Hey, Mom, I'm not going to be home tonight. You know, I'm like, okay. And so he called me that morning. Ma, you know, he called me Meh. He'd say, Meh. I'm like, yes, Jay. He'd go, I'm on my way home. And I go, okay. So I was home. I was babysitting my granddaughter, Ella, and she got sick that day. Out of nowhere, she just got sick. Fever, vomiting, and just out of nowhere. So he comes home and I hear him because you could hear him walking, you could hear him talking, you could hear him breathing. He was just loud about everything. And he came home and I heard him. He's like, Ma, I'm home. And I'm like, Joseph, come upstairs. I want to talk to you. But he didn't. He went in the garage. Talked to my husband for a second, got a bottle of water. He went into the bathroom, went into his room. And then he's like, man, I'll call you later. I'm like, Joe. And he walked out the door. I never saw him again. So that day I called him and I had this feeling, just this weird feeling. I said, are you okay? I feel like you're trying to avoid me or something. He's like, yeah, Ma. Who was in my room? And I said, we were in your room. Ella got sick. And so your room is the coldest room. So he's like, okay, well, and then he was like, I'll call you later. So I said, okay. So it's like 3:00. I called him and there's no answer. Throughout the evening and into the night, I was texting him and calling him. There's no reply, no answer. And I had this like sick feeling in my stomach. It was just this sick feeling. So I laid down. I told my husband, he goes, where's Joe? And I said, I don't know, he's not responding to me. And it's really odd because he always does. So we laid down and I couldn't sleep. I was just laying there. And it was really weird because it was like 2:00 in the morning. And there was this, like the sound of a backfire of a car. And I sat up and my husband says, did you hear that? And I said, yeah. And he looked outside the window, but there was no cars. It was a really weird night because it was still. When I think back, it was a very still night. And there was no cars. There was no people walking by. It was nothing. So I laid back down and he's like, it's Joe home. So I ran, went downstairs, checked his room, but he wasn't there. So I said, but something feels wrong. Something don't feel right. I don't know what it is, but he's like, oh, he's probably fell asleep at one of his friend's house. So that next morning, I just laid in bed staring
Had
at
this ever happened to you before?
No.
Where, okay,
No.
so there was never a situation, so you couldn't even say, oh, sometimes he does this where he just
No.
sort of disappears for 24 hours.
No,
Okay.
never.
Okay.
Never. In the 27th, never.
Okay.
And so it was just odd because he always replied. He always called me back or text me. And so it was just odd. I had not heard from him all evening. And so anyhow, I went out. I remember going downstairs that morning. I got up. It was like 7:30, 7:45, and my husband went to work. He goes, I'll call him, but if you hear from him, call me. Not thinking anything about it. So I get to work. My niece came and gave me a ride, and I went to work. And so I called one of his friends, and I asked her. I said, "Hey, have you talked to Joe? Because he hasn't called me. Like, I don't know where he's." She sounded surprised because she said, he didn't come home last night? And I said, no. She goes, he didn't come home this morning? I said, no. And she said, well, I was with him last night. I said, he did not come home. I can't reach him. I said, can you call a couple of his friends? I don't want to seem like a helicopter mom, but it's not like him. So 5 minutes later, and I'm at work because I'm getting my laptop to go home or to go looking where he was at. because something felt off. And so
What
she called
story,
me.
what story are you telling yourself at this point, right?
I'm
Like,
telling myself something happened. Something has happened. I couldn't put my finger on what, but I knew something had happened, but to the degree that it was not in my universe at all. So she calls me back 5 minutes later and she's crying. She's crying so hard. She's crying. I can't understand what she's saying. And the only word I hear from that comes out of her mouth is coroner. And I remember going into like one of our testing rooms because it's soundproof. I remember going in there and I just like, I fell to the ground and I was somewhere else. I remember my coworkers, two of my coworkers came and got me and walked me to their car to take me to my husband who was working next door. He worked at a university. But I remember I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't feel my legs. Like my legs felt numb. I don't know. At that point, I didn't know anything. I just heard coroner. And to me, in my mind, it was connected to something's happened.
you
It
knew
was
it.
those two.
It's like when I found out that my brother died, it doesn't compute because it's too massive. The idea
It's too
of it
big.
is so big that you can't take it in, but I can feel it. I
Yeah.
can feel it from you right now. It's so
Yeah.
big, and you know it at a soulful level, but your physical body and mind cannot possibly compute
Right.
that your son has died.
There's just like, and I couldn't, and I hadn't received a phone call. It was her crying, trying to tell me something and me only hearing that word. So I'm in the car, my coworker's saying, we don't know. Let me get you to Izzy. Isidore is my husband, but we all call him Izzy. Let me get you to Izzy, and then you guys can find out what's going on. On the way to his job, which is 2 minutes from mine, I get a phone call, and it's Joe's phone. And I take this deep breath, and I go, oh my God, it's Joe. Okay. I answer the phone, very just because that's what they do. That's their job. They don't have any emotion in those words. This is Joseph Suarez's mother. And I said, yeah. I need to talk to Joe. And she goes, we picked him up this morning. Your son has died. And I said, no, you need to put Joe on the phone. I don't know who you are, but you need to put him on the phone. She's like, ma'am, he's at the coroner's office. You can get in touch with, and she's telling me things that I can't even hear her. I can't hear what she's saying. I remember like feeling this like warm sensation in my legs. And I remember looking down and I had urinated on myself because could not grasp. I could not grasp that what she was saying. So I dropped the phone, and my friend looks at me and she's like, we had pulled up at my husband's job. And so I get out of her car and I see him, and he works in landscaping. And so I see him and he's on this cart thing, and he's driving, but his back is to me. I just remember like running. I was running to him and I was screaming his name. It was like, I felt like I was like like I was moving in slow motion, and I was screaming his name, but he kept driving further away. And he made a U-turn and he saw me, and he gets out of his truck and he goes, babe, what's wrong? And I said, and he goes, it's Joe. And I said, and we just fell to the ground, both of us. Like we just fell. We were on the gravel in the parking lot. And it was so, just that moment, I remember I felt like him and I were like one soul at that point, because the thought that somebody just called me, and he's like, I've been trying to call him all morning, and and my phone rang again, and it's this coroner's office, and he's screaming into the phone, and he's like, "Where's my son?" And he was just out of his mind. Somehow we get to his car. My coworkers helped us get to his truck. We get in his truck. We shouldn't have been driving, but not even.
I literally was just thinking, like, I'm so overwhelmed with emotion. I know it's coming from you. Just I can see it. I can feel it, and that's the first thing I was thinking. You guys should not be behind a wheel.
We got in his truck, and he's like, we got to get to my mom's house, my mom and dad, because they didn't live far from his job. And he goes, I remember us being at a stoplight, and he's like, "Babe, which way do we go?" I just remember like telling, I don't know where. I could not identify. We've lived in this town our entire life. I could not identify where we were. I don't even know how long it took us to get there. And that was the beginning. I didn't get no phone call from the police department. That was the only call I had gotten. And I remember going home we went to his mom and dad's, and then he called. I could hear him in the living room. I went to the bedroom to lay down, and I could hear him telling my in-laws. And Joe is the only son between his mom and dad. So his mom was married previously, and his dad was married previously, but their marriage together, Isidore's was like the only son. And so therefore Joe became
right
this little prince,
right.
And so I could hear him telling them, and it was like they were far away. It was like an echo. And then my niece Elaine came. He had called her, and then she was very close to. We're just a very close family, and she's like, "What happened?" And all I remember is her driving me home, and there were people. We lived in a condominium unit, and so it was a little area community, and there were just these tons of cars everywhere. And she got me upstairs, and I went to sleep. I just was like, I just wanted to sleep. And that was the beginning of this. I didn't even know, and what I found out a few hours later was he was at an apartment at an acquaintance that lived 2 minutes from our condo, just down the street. And that was the beginning of this dark, unimaginable, like, this is not real. This is not happening. This can't be happening. It's Joe. Like, this is not, I remember I kept pinching myself. I was pinching myself when we were in his truck, when Eileen was taking me home, I was pinching myself. I just kept pinching myself. And I remember I had all these like marks on my arms from pinching, because I kept pinching, because I knew that I had to be in some dream. It had to have been a nightmare. There was no way this was happening. There was no way. It was impossible. They had it wrong. They had it all wrong. They had the wrong person. They had the wrong kid. They had the wrong everything. And it just, I was gone.
Yeah, that's really what
gone.
That's really
my
what
soul.
It is.
Yeah, my soul, my mind. My sister told me, I don't remember this, but she's like, I had stopped eating. Like, she would hand feed me. Yeah, it was a place so dark that I never imagined coming out of that. I knew, like, I would not survive. I knew I could not survive. I could not live in a world without my 3 children. And then when you're in that state of mind, all you think about is, I don't want to be here if he's not here. I can't be here. without him. Because your mind goes to this other place. You're not thinking rationally. You're not thinking about your living children. You're not thinking about your husband. You're not thinking about anything other than, I just want to be with my son. But it's such an unimaginable feeling that you're so numb as the days were going by. And I got no phone call from law enforcement. I got nothing from anybody. And I still didn't know, like, what happened.
Okay,
happened?
so at this point, you don't even know how
Mm-mm.
he died. You know nothing. How much time are we talking has passed?
We're talking, so the coroner kept him for 28 days.
And you know nothing. You don't know if he
Nothing.
died of a heart attack.
Nope.
Are you
Nothing.
calling? Are you trying to get answers?
I called police department. They gave me a case number, left messages for this. Apparently this was now an investigation. That's why they had to keep him at the coroner for the length of time that his body could not be released until the investigation was closed. So like the next day, as things are, it's still not real, but I'm going through the motions of what happened. And I was told that he was down the street, and I told my husband, we got to go to the coroner's office. Nobody's calling me back. So he's like, they're not going to let us in. Like, I don't care. We're going to walk around that parking lot until they open a door. Because it's not open to the public. So there's no door that says welcome, you know. And the coroner's office was down like not far from our house. So we went and we're walking around through the parking lot. He goes, babe, nobody's going to answer. Nobody's going to open. And we are going to walk this parking lot until somebody opens that door. Finally, somebody opened the door and they asked me, ma'am, can I help you? I said, and so I explained to him everything. I asked him, can you please help me, please? And so he let us in. He looked on he goes, I'm going to do this, but I can't let you go back and see him. And I go, he's here. He's here. And then it was kind of like he knew he had said too much already. And I said, I just need to know who to talk to find out. Now it's been like 4 days. So he brings up, this file and this number, and he's like, okay, well, you can call this is his case number, ID, whatever, call this person and call this person. And I'm like, Jesus, oh my God. I'm just like, could not believe that I had no inclination. We had no information. In fact, somebody else identified him that was at the apartment. We didn't even get to see him to identify him. According to the
Wait, you never identified the body? Who did?
Somebody that was at the apartment. And they said he had his wallet on him. And when they told me, when we called you and you said you were Joseph's mother, that was you identifying him. And I said, and your mind is just like,
of course,
you're not thinking.
Of course, right. No, right.
Whereas now I go back and but at that time, you're not processing not only what has just happened, but what they are not telling you. And so I finally talked to an investigator, the one that was handling Joe's case. And I said, look, I am his mother. I need to just know what is going on. Who identified him? How do I even know that that's him? How do I know? Well, somebody at the scene identified him. That's who? It wasn't me. It wasn't my husband. And he couldn't give me nothing. Couldn't give me anything.
I am so shocked by this. I don't know why. It seems like the parents would be the ones to come and identify the body.
You would think. But a week had gone by, going into the second week, and I had called police. I found the investigator's name, got his number. He could not provide me any information other than his body would be released once the investigation was closed. And I said, okay, can you tell me what you have so I can know something? I'm sorry, we can't give you that information until the investigation. So I said, okay. So I'm just beside myself. I had nothing. and Joe was still at the coroner's office. So week 2 went, now we're into the second week, and I said, one of his best friends comes to me, and they all call me mom. And he's like, Mom, do you mind if I do, his name's Colby. And he goes, do you mind if I do a GoFundMe for Joe? And I said, and I'm not even me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we got to do a service. We have to, and I said, I remember looking at him going, honey, yeah, thank you, and he put his arms around me. He goes, I love you. And I said, I love you too. Thank you. And Susan, he put that GoFundMe out there. And within the first 2 hours, I think there was maybe 2,500. And then it went to 3, and then it went to 5, and then it went to 6, and then it went to 7. And it was just, I think it took a matter of a few days before it reached what he was requesting. He called me and he's like, Mama, have you seen? It's like watching the lottery. It was just amazing. The love that so many people, just without a second thought, he had raised enough money that we could give him this beautiful service, But it was just like watching this clock just ticking. And I said, we were in the kitchen, and I remember one of his friends saying, why do we have to wait? Can't we just celebrate his life? Because I didn't know if it was going to be a month. I didn't know if it was going to be 2 months. I didn't have nothing, no information. And I looked at him and I said, you're right. So June the 7th, I think it was, which was like maybe 2 weeks later, 7 days later, we had his service. My girls and my niece did everything. We just showed up. They just took the ball and ran with it. They just made this massive, beautiful, it was Joe 100%. 100%. That service was every bit him. And I remember walking up to the church, and there was people, Susan, just people everywhere. There were cars trying to find parking. And I'm like thinking, did somebody have a service before us? And I walked up, and all his buddies, he called them they were his tribe. It was a group of them, his tribe. They all were in suits. I remember them all having a suit on. And it was so they were so proud. We walked in, and it was just, I don't know, I can't even find a word for it. I remember I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel my feet. Could not feel my body. And I'm looking at all these flowers like this. The front of the church was full of beautiful flowers and pictures that they had blown up, poster-sized pictures of Joe. And and my husband, we were just weak. And I remember the father coming up to me, and my husband is and he said, Joe is here, and he needs you to be strong. And I can remember my husband, I can remember his back just coming up. He's just he went from being, we were like this, he went up, and he put his arm around me, and he held me. He held me up. And after that, it was just this feeling of, I had this warm, tingly feeling inside of me, come through. And I had stopped crying. And it was just this very unrealistic emotion that we both were feeling. And our girls were next, were right there with us. And it was just, we had to be strong, not just but for them. That's their brother. That was their only brother. I remember looking over, and they were both just looking at us. They were looking at me and my husband, and we just sat up and we walked out. And I just remember looking, and there was just people and people and people and people I've never seen in my entire life. But that's what he did. He knew and met so many people. But here's the big aha moment. We get to the reception, and suddenly, the music's playing, everybody's eating, and I'm just in autopilot. So I get the microphone and I start, I'm like, if anybody wants to come up and share a moment, you're welcome to. And so I said a little something. My husband said a little something. Suddenly there's this guy. This guy walks up, never seen him before, didn't know who he was. Gets the microphone and he said, I know all of you are probably wondering, who is this guy? And that's the first thing everybody's thinking, who is this guy? He goes, I met Joe. He had called an Uber and I went and picked him up. He goes, and the minute he got into my car, it was just I got this feeling of, this guy is something. And he goes, he's just talking away, asking me how long I've been doing my job and if I liked it and what high school I went to. And he goes, man, he just was the coolest guy. He goes, and it turns out I went to school with his sister. So he went to school with Allie, this guy. So we're all sitting there going, we're watching him talk. And he goes, and later that night, I got a call. I got another request for an Uber driver and it was Joe. He goes, I rarely get the same person. And he gets in the car. He goes, hey, man, so how's it been going tonight? You've been getting a lot of rides. And he goes, man, he just talked. He goes, this guy was different. There was something about him I couldn't put my finger on. He goes, but he was just a different kind of spirit that anybody I'd ever met. He goes, so everybody out here, he goes, Allie, and those of you who've known Joe your whole life, man, you guys are so lucky. You're so lucky. I knew him all of 5 minutes. And man, he changed my world. And he goes, I didn't see this coming. He goes, and man, I heard about it. And I had to come and share that with you. And oh my gosh, Susan, everybody was, you could hear a pin drop in this reception hall where everybody had met after the service.
What a gift. Was that, what a gift.
Huge. Huge.
I mean, that just sort of like, it just sort of punctuates this point of what a powerful spirit he was, right? For somebody who had known him so briefly, to be so touched by him, to come get up and speak at his service.
Was such a pivotal moment in this journey. I call it my uninvited journey, that I often will go back and watch that again and again and again and again, just so I can remind myself, hey, but that was the beginning of all these things that began to happen to us. Yeah. So here's what happened. So that Monday, that his service was on a Friday, that Monday I was taken to the hospital. I had just self-medicated too much because it had hit me.
Elaine, did you try to take your life, or did you accident?
I don't know. I think part of me was yes, and part of me was no. But I thought I was fine. I mean, but I was like, we were taking things back to all the vendors, the people that had literally donated things. And so we stopped at a restaurant bar, and my niece went to the restroom, and I remember just doing shots of liquor. I can't remember how many. And then she came back and she's like, what have you done? And I had taken some prescription. They weren't prescription. I had taken some things, some pills earlier in the day or the night before that were still affecting me. I don't know. I just didn't want to feel nothing. And I remember her driving me home and I fell apart. I fell apart. I just fell apart. And it happened to be, that was the day his body was sent to the crematorium. It was that moment. And so I was feeling something from him, I could feel what was happening without saying what was happening. I remember being in the hospital and there was this nurse that came. She was really pretty. She had like blonde hair. And she says, are you Joe's mom? And I said, I remember looking up at her and I said, yeah, I get that all the time to this day. I said, yeah, I'm Joe's mom. She said, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, and I looked at her and I said, how do you know Joe? She said, you're not supposed to be here. So she goes, I'm going to get the doctor. They're going to, wait till your blood pressure goes down. We're going to get, and then we're going to release you to go home. So doctor came, signed off, she's okay. She can go home. So I told my husband, I said, where's the lady? Where's the nurse? The real pretty nurse with the blonde hair.
She was a spirit, wasn't she? I knew you. I'm freaking out. I'm like, that nurse. Wow. That nurse was that nurse. Like you were headed to the other side, and they're saying, no, you need to go. You need to go back. That's what was going on. I am on fire right now. There is chills.
Well, but prior to that, when they had taken me from home, my home, they had taken me home before taking me to the hospital, and I remember it getting quiet. Like everybody was there. They were trying to wake me up. I could feel myself. Things going dark, and then I couldn't hear anybody yelling anymore. I couldn't hear anybody yelling.
You had a near-death experience. That's what you had.
And I remember I was like, it was dark. And then I heard somebody crying. I heard a little girl crying. So when I opened my eyes, I was in the ambulance, and I asked the lady, where's Ella? She said, who? And I said, Ella's crying. And she said, honey, you're on your way to the hospital. And so I asked my daughter later, I said, was she at the condo when the ambulance came? She said, no, Mom, she was home with with Jordan, her dad. And I heard her crying. That's when my eyes opened. So I call her my little lifesaver, because she did, I think she saved my life. But then the nurse at the hospital, and that, Susan, was the beginning of all these spiritual things that began to happen to me. Let's move in the last 15 minutes, because again, these conversations go by. So I want to qualify though, the blonde nurse wasn't real, correct? I mean, she was very real in spirit. She was very real in telling you to come back. She was nowhere around.
She was not in the hospital. Okay.
No.
Okay. That was my feeling when you started talking, but I just wanted to make sure for listeners, I don't want them hanging on the edge of their seat going, wait a second,
I know. No,
okay,
she was not a real person, because she was nowhere. My husband's like, who are you talking about? I'm like,
this is what we call near-death experience, when in the spirit world they say it's not your time. You need to go back. Okay. So you're back in your body. I think two things that we have to hear is how you found out. I want to hear about the fentanyl poisoning, because it's such an epidemic. And my guess is, it's not a guess, it's a knowing that was an accidental thing. And then what this grief journey and the spiritual things that have happened to you as a result. So go ahead, talk. So bring us back to when you found out.
Okay. So I want to make a point of saying that I hate that word. I do. I hate that word, because it is not who he was about. It is not what he was made of. It is not the world that and I'm not just saying this because I knew Joe wasn't perfect. He wasn't. He was perfect to me, but he wasn't perfect all the time in making decisions and choices. He just was this free spirit. And so it was not about so much, that was a part of it, but we had incidences that had occurred, symptoms that occurred prior, that we look back and go, oh. So the HCM, he had fainted a couple of times. He don't remember how he fainted. And with HCM, you can die instantly. You can be cooking dinner and then just fall over and die. And so, so to me, it was just, I saw that first. And then as I'm reading, so I got the vital statistics in the mail, and I'm reading it. I remember reading it and just looking at it thinking, this is wrong. This is not what? And I remember putting it back in the envelope and hiding it, because I didn't want my husband to see it. I wanted to protect him from seeing that. I protect those I love, and I didn't want him to see that. So that night I brought it out again. So I called the coroner that next morning, and I asked him, can you explain this to me? I don't understand. He goes, well, what part do you not understand? I go, well, I don't understand. How did he get how did he get a heart disease? And what is this, like, fentanyl sitting? Why is this? And it was like a 0.01. It was like a 0.01. So he had anxiety, and every so often, he would take I don't know, I'm not going to say every so, he would take something to help ease that anxiety. he was going through some stuff in his life that he was trying to figure out. He was trying to figure his way, like, what's he going to do with the rest of his life? Where's he going to go? What's he going to be? All these things that young adult men feel when they're not unsure about the direction that they're going. So I still to this day do not know what happened that night.
Well, you know, it's interesting because fentanyl is such an epidemic now. And I worked with a mother for a year whose son had taken a Xanax for anxiety that it was laced with fentanyl. He didn't get
And
it
that's
from
what
his
it was.
doctor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And but also kids are taking gummies. I just read an article about a young person who took
Yeah.
a gummy, a THC gummy, right? A pot gummy, and it was laced with fentanyl. So
Yeah.
it is an epidemic.
Everywhere.
And yes. Yes.
2018, it was, it was still, it was known, but not to the degree that it is now. And so, it had on the vital statistics report, it was 0.01, and then it had Xanax next to it. And I go, somebody gave him a pill.
Yes.
And that was it. That was it. That was the end of everything. But the heart condition came about from over years that we didn't even know. Like the coroner said, that is years of buildup, not just last year or the year before. And it made sense as to why he fainted. He had fainted quickly. I'll try to summarize this up. He had fainted on May 28th, 2016. He was taken to the hospital at 7:25. His last phone call on his phone was May 28th, 7:15 at 7:25.
He literally died 2 years to the day from his faint. It's crazy. That stuff, that's insane.
And that is one of many experiences that we have discovered. Dimes, you should see, I have a thing of a candle holder that's empty, and the dimes are almost full. Everywhere, random.
Dimes.
We'll be out of town and we'll find a dime in the street. And people I tell that story to, they begin to find a dime. And so it's just spiritually like it. So we got this vital statistics report. I called the coroner, the lady that called me that day, and I asked her, I need you to walk me through what happened. And she says to me, you don't know? No, I don't know. We have never been told what happened. And that when you went to pick up my son, please tell me what you saw. And this was 3 months later. And she walked me through it as from the time she got there. And she's like, are you okay? And I said, I need to know. And even what she said to me wasn't clear because she got there after the fact. So, and I still don't, I know this. He came home, he left to go meet a friend at this restaurant, bar. And I don't know what happened after that. To this day, there's people who do know, but I've come with peace on that because I cannot holding on to that anger and hatred and animosity to people that I know what happened.
And
it's not just,
was it refusal just to tell you? Like, I don't understand. Like, why?
I don't know. That's the thing is I don't know what I don't. And they just
right. You don't know what you don't know.
It's almost like they don't want to say for reasons of they did something they didn't do something they should have done, like maybe called 911 instead of waiting to call 911. I don't know. That's my gut feeling.
How did you let that go? Because, anger, you've read my book, anger is one of the most debilitating. Grief is a very interesting thing because it's ugly, it's painful, it's all the things, but it's also, sometimes it's easier to hang on to anger than to sink fully into the sadness of that loss, right?
Well,
how did you let go of that?
I'll tell you. Here's what happened. I got a phone call. A friend of mine came to our front door at 2:00 in the morning. She goes, I need to tell you something. And she has this ability, the spiritual ability that she pushes away a lot. And she sat me down and she said, I had a dream. And I need to tell you about this dream. because Joe keeps coming to me in my dreams. And I need to tell you, so she tells me about her dream. And in that dream, Joe is telling me, Mom, you gotta let that go. Because I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And I'm alone, and I don't want to be alone. So I need you to let that go. God's going to take care of all of that. But Mom, you got to let this go. And there was more to the dream, but the gist of it was that. And I remember saying to her, and in that dream, she said, I told him I can't. And he got really upset. He goes, then I'm going to be alone. Do you want me to be alone? I'm not where I'm supposed to be, because you got to stop.
Because your deep grief and anger was keeping him tethered, right? To where, and he needed to move on, and he couldn't because he was too deeply concerned about you.
So I went in his room that next morning, and I got on my knees and I prayed, and I just said, I'm going to give him back to you, because I want him to have peace. I want him to rest. But that was even hard to eat. That's still hard for me to say. So I did. And I let go of that anger, and I let go of that darkness and that hate and that all those things that were killing me inside. I couldn't be me. I couldn't be a better grandmother. I couldn't be a wife. I couldn't be a mother. So I just couldn't, because it was so heavy. So and it was like immediately when I let that go, it was this feeling of like,
I'm sure I have to say a couple of things, because I'm sure there are people being, saying, how did you let it go? Like, I can see that you have faith. I see the cross on your wall. I'm imagining that is Joe behind you. Is that a painting of Joe behind
somebody
you?
Did that painting for me. Yeah.
And I see the wings of the bird. And so you have deep faith. Anger, I want to say this, I'm feeling guided to say this to all of my listeners too. Anger is a very powerful emotion, because oftentimes there is guilt around letting go of our anger and grief, because somehow we feel like if we let that go, that is somehow honoring our deceased, that if we let it go and we let joy back into our life, that we're portraying this human being that we love so deeply. And of course, you and I, after healing and really moving through the healing, just the opposite is true. As we release that very dense energy, it actually brings us closer for us to be able to communicate to our loved ones who have transitioned, because they vibrate at a much higher level than we do. Right.
It's huge.
Yeah. And so when we're in deep grief, our vibration is even lower, and they they're always trying. They are always trying to communicate with us. The only thing we have to do is ask. So I wanted to just say that and go back to the anger. So when you said you're carrying all this anger and you were able to let it go, obviously I know that this dream probably deeply disturbed you. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want my son to be alone.
Right.
But wanting to let it go and letting it go are two very different things. Was it a surrendering? What did that? I know you said you were in prayer, but to truly let anger go, it's a shift in consciousness. If we really want to talk about what it is a shift in consciousness.
The word surrender that you said is what it jumped out at me. And that's what that was, because I had ran into the guy that lived at that apartment a couple of times. I had ran into him, I'd seen him. And the first time it's not good. The second time I had to walk away. Because they're all the people that Joe knew. There was one person that was there, and he wasn't a close friend. He wasn't family. He wasn't anybody that ran in his circle. So surrendering that to him, like letting go of that hatred to him, letting go of the hatred and anger and all the things that can take your soul. I had to surrender that. I couldn't just let it go. I was on my knees and I gave him back.
And did you literally feel the physical sensation of what happened?
So powerful.
Yes.
It was so powerful. It was like, it really was surreal, because it was like, imagine having like these huge things that are weights,
Boulders,
heavy metal, boulders, like heavy, multiple, just weighing on your shoulders to them. Literally, literally just disappearing. And it was so powerful. And I felt this sense of bittersweet, this joy, in a sense, not joy that.
I know what you mean.
Okay, so it was that kind of joy, like, okay. Every so often it creeps back in. I'm not going to lie, it'll creep back in. It's like the devil saying, I'm right here.
Right.
Just come on, welcome.
It really is. It's where we
Yeah.
put our focus. Do we put our focus on the light, or do we put our focus on the dark? It really, I got chills.
And I do too.
Yeah.
I think about Joe, and I think about Joe and him. He's like, I could hear him. Mom, look at me.
Choose the light. That's what he's saying.
Look at me. Look at me, Mom. Don't look at me. And so I will literally go, and I'll just walk away, because it sits there, and it'll like slowly like creeping in, and I'll be like, this is, yeah. So that's what I do. But there's so many messages I've received, strong messages, not just a dime, but him talking to me through other people. I'm not crazy. And I've discovered I'm not crazy.
No, you're not crazy, because my brother comes through a lot of different people. That's the beauty. We're all channels. Every single one of us are, if we're open and pay attention.
And
right?
that's the key. The key is to being open. And the key is, I figured this out. The bigger my spiritual world becomes,
yes,
the bigger and the more powerful it becomes. I think that's why I can do this. This is how I'm doing this, because spiritually I've grown, and I continue to grow. And it's like Joe's like right here. He's right here. I can feel him right here.
Yes.
I have chills again. I've had him throughout our interview here, but it's like it's like he's not gone, because I'm open to believing. And now my husband's open to believing, and my girls are open to believing. But as a mother, it's so big. It's so big that I go, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I'm gonna keep growing. I'm gonna get stronger in the spiritual realm. And he's right. He's with me. So when people say, how do you do it?
Yes.
This is how I do it. This is what works for me, because I cannot be in a corner dying slowly in the dark. I can't. It's not an option. It's not an option, because Joe's going, Mama, he's calling me, man. He go, man, look at me, man. I'm right here. Come on, let's go. Even when we moved, I don't know, we'll have to do, we can talk all day, but even when we moved from the location where he lived recently, huge awakening.
Well, what I would like you to end with, because we've only got a few minutes, what I would like you to end with, always got 2 questions at the end that I'll ask you, but if you could tell us, because I think that when I read your story, what blew me away was the 2 letters that you found in your new home. And those letters, when we think that the spirit world is far more powerful than we are. And and they, like I said, they communicate with us all the time.
Yeah.
Those letters, when I read that story and you found the letters, I'm like, they came from heaven, right? Obviously Joe wrote them when he was here, but you found them. They were a direct line of communication from your son.
Appeared. Yeah.
So
they just
appeared. Tell us about those 2 letters and when you found them.
We had been here in our new place here. We had been here a week. My good friend and our father came to bless our house. It was Good Friday. And my husband sat here and said, how will we know that Joe's here? How will we know that he came with us? And he says to my husband, you'll know. You'll just know. You'll just know. Okay. That day, I had a box that I had told my husband to throw away. I had told him to throw it away. I don't need anything in that box. He goes, are you sure? I go, yes. One more time. Are you sure you want to throw this away? Let me look at it. I'll look at it real quick. So I'm going through the box, trash. There's a red binder in the bottom, and it has all my stuff in it, right, from my job. And so so I'm looking through the binder, and I'm like, there's these 2 pieces of paper on the very back, and they're folded. And I look, and I'm like, what is that? So I pull it out, and I'm looking, I open it, and the front says Mama, and I open it, and it's Joe. It's a letter he had wrote to me, and one for my husband, and his said Pops, because he used to call him Pops. He had written those letters when he was 19. I don't remember ever seeing the letters. The only reason my husband could identify them was because the Lakers beat the Boston Celtics that year. Joe's a Lakers fan. My husband's Boston Celtics. And I'm reading this, and he's thanking me. He's thanking me for being the most amazing mother, and that because of me, he grew up to be before he left this earth, is what he said. He was grateful. That's what the letter said. You have made me into the man that I became. And then Isidore said, Pops, what do you think about that Lakers beating the Celtics? And I'm just like, and he goes on to say, I love you, Pops. Thank you for being, just this whole thing. And I'm sitting here looking at these letters going.
Exactly. Where did
I
these
framed
come
them
from?
and where I did not put them there. And that red binder I had in my bedroom in our condo this whole time. I'd never seen those letters. That day. And I was at that point, I went, he's here.
Yeah.
I'm good. We're good.
Okay, I'm going to end with 2 questions.
Okay, all right.
Here are my 2 questions. What does self-love mean to you now?
Self-love is taking care of myself. And the best way to do that is to continue growing in the spiritual life, because that is what keeps me connected. That is what keeps me alive. That is what keeps me going. And knowing that one day he's going to be waiting for me. That's self-love to me. Taking care of myself first so I can love in the same manner to my living children, to Allie, to Julie, to my grandchildren, Jet, Harrison, Ella, to my son-in-law, Jordan, to my husband, Isidore. I can love wholly, not. I will always be, Billy Bob Thornton has this video, and he says, I
love it. I know exactly.
I will 50%. Always be 50% happy, 50% sad at any given moment. And the sooner I can embrace that, the better off I'll be. That is
I
my
can't
self-love.
believe you brought that up. That's one of my favorite videos. I remember watching that after my brother died. I'm like, that is so beautiful. All right,
so
last
powerful.
question.
Yeah.
Finish this sentence. Hope is
believing and being open. It's all a matter of how we think. I still hurt, and I still cry, and I still miss, but if you believe and open your mind to what is possible, it is the steps forward become just a little bit easier. Not a lot, just a little easier.
And I have to say, I always, when I pull these cards now, how they come full circle. So if our listeners remember that I pulled higher power and blessed, when we are hooked in and connected to our higher power, we feel the blessings. They come into our life every moment of every day. You could not have ended this on a better note. Thank you, Spirit. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Happy birthday. And thank you so much. What a beautiful interview. What a beautiful soul you are. Thank you. I can feel that this is going to touch so many people. I hope
so.
Every parent who has lost a child is able to listen to this.
Thank you so much,
this
Susan, for
podcast.
that. I appreciate your time and taking the time to, meet with me and hear my story, because it's, he left too soon. So I'm finishing his story. So that's what I'm doing.
Yes. And I want to thank all of my listeners. Thank you guys. I love you. I appreciate your support. And of course, those oracle cards that I pull, there's always people out there. That message is for you too. Somebody needed to hear that today as well. I love you guys, and I'll see you here next week. Bye for now.